This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
TaxAct knows filing your small business taxes can be a nightmare, like the kind where you're being chased by a giant W-2 form, and you're running and running, but you can never reach the submit button. Or something like that. So, TaxAct offers Expert Assist with live tax experts to make filing taxes less scary. Now, you can just have pleasant dreams about being chased by other giant, non-threatening paperwork. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Come meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. We've got a bit from Richard at Remembers at the end of the show. We've got a talk with Alan about the Hale baseball team at the end of the show. But before we get to any of that, we bring in Jake Wood, who last time around was here, had his own show. Now he's moved up in the world, I guess you could say. You're running the VEB podcast, you're writing over there as well.
That's right. It's a big step up for me. And, I'm very thankful for Heather and those guys over at Viva El Birdos for giving me the opportunity, as well as just like, I don't know, it was less than a year after I had created just what I thought would be just the silly little podcast that, Adam and I had started. And after a couple months, unfortunately, he kind of wasn't able to do it anymore. And I kind of took, full reins of the whole thing and kept it going. And it thankfully, I just put my head down, kept working, and it wound up getting me somewhere that was, a paid position and actually like writing content to be put out for Cardinals fans. So it's been kind of a whirlwind, but I'm thrilled to be with Viva El Birdos. And like we were talking about pre-show, I'm just excited to keep pushing it forward and keep trying to take it to new heights for all the Cardinals fans out there that really enjoy our content and love listening.
So what's it been like, that transition? Because like you said, you were pretty much doing your show, kind of solo by yourself there for a while. And then now you've shifted to, not only are you bringing in, significant number of guests, but you also have, a round table as well every time with Heather and some of the other writers. What's that been like to have a few extra voices around?
I mean, first and foremost, every single person in there is so knowledgeable and so intelligent with their thought process, and they're all unique and individual. With Adam Akbani, he's very analytically driven and very forward thinking in his thought process. With Gabe Simons, he's very practical in his and what's the word? Not just practical, but he also is very pragmatic in his thinking. And so, like, I would compare him to very, Cardinals-esque way of the way they think about things too. And then Heather is just, an absolute delight, and she loves jumping in. And like, she self-admittedly is like, I just like to let you guys talk more, but I'll jump in where I can. And she always brings that, kind of more casual fan perspective to it all, but it's still, very intentional and very necessary, because we have to remember that not every single fan that consumes our content is going to be, analytically deep and driven, but it's also, important to keep it at surface level for some fans as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, although I would, obviously VEB has quite the reputation. So, but it is, you never know who's going to stumble across it as well. So, so we're here. We're, I guess halfway through spring training. About a third of the way through the games. We've seen some cuts. We've seen some news this week, although not just a whole lot. It's still been, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's been a very dramatic spring yet either, right? I mean, it's more than the off season because there was absolutely nothing in the off season, but it still, to me, doesn't feel like we've just had just a whole lot of activity going on, things to, talking points and things of that nature going on this spring.
Yeah, it was a really rough, brutal offseason for people like you and I, who had to come up with and conjure things to talk about that weren't baseball related, basically. I think that's why, like, shout out to Ben and Nate, who do talking about birds. Like, those guys can find anything to talk about and make it sound interesting, unless it's Emmy Awards. That was pretty tough listen.
I mean,
But
don't encourage them. Eventually, they're going to have a show that's like 45 minutes of randomness and about 25 minutes of the Cardinals, I think.
I
So,
mean, the way they just end up week after week having such a packed show, I sit back and I go, wow, it's just incredible.
and of course we love you, Ben and Nate.
Very much so.
But we have to get the digs in where we can. Yeah, I mean it's been different. So what has stood out for you then so far this spring, um, on either side of the anything in the roster? What's looking for you?
So, to be quite frank, and I do fall under the the side that, not a lot has happened so far in spring is very consequential on what have felt like the Cardinals are intending to do going into this season. Good or bad. What I'm looking at right now is just, for one, and I'm sure we'll get to the Jordan Walker stuff in a little bit, but are guys, staying healthy? Are they, continuing to go about their work and get and just prepare themselves properly for the season? Now, there are a couple instances that I've seen some things that I've really taken note of, namely specifically Nolan Arenado, whenever he hit that home run, and it was a pulled fly ball in the air. And what's, one of the big knocks against Nolan Arenado the last couple seasons, as we've kind of seen his production take a step back, is he's really struggled to get that pulled fly ball in the air and to get that lift and separation on it and really generate that power. And to see that early on in spring was encouraging. And I don't necessarily think that Cardinals fans are going to see like peak prime Nolan Arenado in 2025, but I do anticipate there being some form of a bounce back this season that will have Cardinals fans a little more at ease about, what he is going forward.
Yeah, I think, and I don't remember. I think maybe it was on Gateway this week. Maybe it was last week's Mutual, but talked about how you can't really look at the stats because we all know small sample size, various random conditions that are going on there, but there are things that happen that you can take, like you said, with Nolan hitting that fly ball that you hadn't seen in a while. He hit the ball harder, I think, in spring than he had all year last year. You take those kind of I don't know, maybe metrics would be the way to say it, but not the things that show up necessarily in the box score, but things that you can say, hey, that looks like a change in approach. That looks like a different result as well. And you hope that that carries forward to the season because it doesn't really feel like necessarily a fluke.
Right. You're just kind of at this point, at this point now, we're going to start paying a little bit more attention to the stats and things are going to ramp
Mhm.
up. And what they do in games is going to matter a little bit more from this point forward because we're only about 3 weeks away from the season beginning. So now is around the time, not that I'm going to tell any fan how to fan, but for people like me who kind of evaluate the game, I would say that from this point forward, it is now fair to start kind of saying, okay, it's time to get into gear. It's time to get things going. But to your point, at this, up to this point, you're just kind of looking for, once again, guys to maintain their health and also looking for like those subtle details or those little intricacies about each player's game that you're kind of looking and hoping that will, give you those breadcrumbs that, hey, maybe they are going to take a step forward or, hey, maybe they are going to bounce back or, just looking for any little positive things that exist in what their profile suggests that they should be.
And it's been a little different this year because we don't necessarily know how the Cardinals are going to approach a few things, right? And we also don't know that there's a whole lot of position battles to have. There's some talk about center field, but again, what does that look like with how the roster is going to be set up with Nolan playing third base? There's trying to decide who's going to catch more maybe, but there's not really anything that you can. I guess the last spots in the bullpen are always kind of up in the air, but there doesn't feel like there's a real chance that anybody comes out of nowhere to take a job like there have been in maybe in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and just honestly, quite the opposite. I think there are going to be some guys, talking about not taking, spring training stats too far at this point. I think that like Victor Scott specifically, unless there is an injury to like a Lars Nootbaar, which, has the ability to happen. We've seen it in the past, or a Gorman or a Donovan or somebody in that realm. I think that the most likely outcome, unless he just simply outplays Nolan Gorman at this point, which, every expectation has been that Gorman's going to get 500 plus at bats this season, unless Victor Scott proves himself to be more of a future entity than Nolan Gorman, which is a very difficult thing for him to achieve. I don't see any way that he makes this roster on opening day as a starting center fielder. Now, I mean, obviously that can change, but just from where I sit, from my perspective, Nolan Arenado coming back, I think the two players most affected by his return is one, Victor Scott the second, and two is Thomas Sajaci. And those two guys, I think, are going to wind up starting the season at AAA, playing every day, and are those, cliche next man up players that once somebody goes down and is injured, those are your first calls up to fill in a role or a starting spot.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made, probably because I've made it, that those 2 guys would have gone anyway, that would have gone to Memphis anyway, just because I think that they are guys that they want to see play every day, and they're just there isn't even in an Arenado-less world, there's not as much of a chance for that to happen. Um, maybe Victor Scott could have played center in that situation, and, although I was still a little bit hesitant that Mike Ciani would be the one they would choose, but it's still there's development that's going to happen at the minor league level as well as these young guys getting a chance at the major league level. So it doesn't do him any good. Doesn't do any good to set Thomas JC on the bench here. He can still have some. It's not like he just tore up Memphis last year. There's a case to be made for him to go back without it being some sort of you know incompetence on the front office's part. And I think you're right. I think with those 2 guys have to. I mean, Victor Scott had a really good spring last year, which is what got him on the roster. That and the collision that
Right.
forced it. He's looks good. I like what we see out of him, and I would love to see him play center field every day for the Cardinals. But I just don't see how that happens when they've said, like you said, they want to see Nolan Gorman, they want to see Lars Nootbaar, and if they're going to hold to that, it becomes very, very difficult for them to then play Victor Scott II.
Right. And so like you said, last season he got off to such a torrid start and it was at the beginning of spring training. Unfortunately, some of the underlying metrics didn't suggest that what he was
Mhm.
doing was sustainable at the major league level. And, people like me and others were kind of suggesting and hinting at that, leading up to opening day, saying that, he still doesn't look quite ready. The numbers underlying don't support what he's doing. The best case scenario for him would have been to start the season at AAA anyway. But because, like you said, pressed out a need and the collision in the outfield, that he was kind of pressed into that duty before he was ready. Again, this same season, he's making his hay early in spring training whenever pitchers are literally just trying to get comfortable with throwing a fastball right down the middle or what have you to the equivalent, or he's facing minor league level pitching. And so for me, I'm taking everything he's done so far kind of with a grain of salt. Now, the next 3 weeks, the last 3 weeks will tell me a little bit more about kind of where he's at in his development cycle. And as we know, development is not always a linear process, right? Things go up and down. Guys take steps forward, steps back sometimes, but that doesn't mean that the player is no longer valuable. It just means that he still has things to work through and work towards. And at this point, um, underlying data suggests that Victor Scott is hitting the ball harder. It says that he's more ready than he was last season. But like I said again, I feel like he could light the world on fire for the next 3 weeks, and perhaps he could force their hand. But more likely than not, I just don't see a scenario, barring injury, where he winds up he winds up putting himself ahead of Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, or Jordan Walker.
Yeah, and of course, barring injury, does a lot of work there, and we saw that this week with Jordan Walker kind of tripping over a sprinkler head trying to make a catch.
How ridiculous.
I mean, everybody, it was it's great baseball tradition. It goes all the way back to Mickey Mantle, but thankfully, it was not a serious thing. That they've set him for precautionary reasons. They actually had him out, I think, doing some stuff today because he's ahead of the curve. He might wind up even getting back into games this weekend. Um, it's about time Jordan Walker dodged a bullet, I think, because he seems to have had not just a whole lot of luck. That being said, he hasn't necessarily had the best of springs either. He's had some good games. I know he's hit the ball hard at times. Have you, I mean, and we haven't got a chance to watch a lot of games, but, is there anything you're seeing not only out of him, but or just in the maybe the write-ups about him that is optimistic for you?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I had the pleasure and the opportunity to be at Winter Warmup this year and help cover that event and write about it. Talk to Jordan Walker, not me directly, but I was in the room whenever he was talking to all of us in the media. And a lot of the things he was saying and the optimism and the excitement and just where he was and the steps that he felt he was taking back towards getting back to that 2023 version where it seemed like he was on the cusp of becoming, a real force in the major leagues. And so, he, along with new hitting coach Brant Brown, have been working a lot together. And he seems to be very, from what I took away from him is just how optimistic and upbeat and excited and joyful he is in where he is at. And Matt Pauly, who does pre and post for KMOX, talked about just right before that injury occurred how he's down there and watching and said that was the best game that he had seen from him offensively right before he had been injured, and how unfortunate that might wind up derailing some of the progress he was making, because he said off the bat, even though it was 0 for 3 with an RBI, he had 3 balls in play that were, clocked in or measured at over 100 miles an hour off the bat. And so, taking that information into account, the fact that he's striking the ball hard, if he's hitting, the big thing is if he's getting lift on it enough. And I've talked to a couple of Cardinals hitting instructors that are in in the organization. And basically the way that they've described it to me, and no disrespect to any of the old heads who um, watch the game and like traditionally think about like hard hit and everything like that. But when we talk about launch angle, the way they explained it to me is just the way that you don't necessarily artificially create that, but the way to get a player to create more lift on the baseball is the point in which they impact the baseball. So basically, if the ball is getting too deep on Jordan Walker, and there are statistic or measurements and stat casts to support this, if his swing is too long and the ball is he's impacting the baseball too far close to like the catcher at that point rather than out in front of his body and making contact out in front of him, then the ball is just going to go straight into the ground. But if you're able to impact the baseball in front of your body, out in front of you, like they say, that will create more natural lift on the baseball. And because of his size and his strength, it will carry it the rest of the way. But so basically what they've been working on with him is just timing and impacting the baseball out in front of his body. And then also he kind of mock showed us where his hands are set at, and getting him more away from his body. I guess he's been getting too close. And so that load process and getting to the baseball is what is causing him to be delayed and late and not able to impact the baseball at the point that they want him to create that, to generate that lift and carry on the baseball. So a lot of things that he's been working with Brant Brown. Long story short, he's very excited about, and I think that Cardinals fans should be excited about what he's going to do in 2025.
Yeah, and that's hopefully the case. That is the problem. Again, we're when you're trying to adjust, doesn't always go well. I mean, again, looking at his spring stats, and again, take whatever, but he has struck out 8 times in the 14 at bats. And I get that that's most likely still adjusting to that swing. Like you said, right before he got injured, he was hitting it better. So maybe as he comes back, we will see a lot more contact, a lot more of what we were starting to see there. But until
And
then, we get there's that nagging bit of concern, right? That maybe this isn't going to click just as easily as we'd like it to.
right. And guys, even, to this point, some guys are intentionally not swinging at certain pitches. Some guys are intentionally, watching pitches go by just to kind of, get their eye retrained on what they're doing again. Even though you're taking batting practice, even though you're, doing live ABs, it's not the same as being in a game against real competition. And so just getting the feel back and getting yourself back into that situation, and then also applying some of the changes that you've made. And we all know that when we, whether or not we're stepping into a batting cage or something, we all have a stance that's comfortable to us. And sometimes that muscle memory takes over and you want to do what you've been doing. And so trying to just retrain your body and your thought process in your mind to do that new thing that will make you more successful, it just kind of takes time to take over. And so I don't, again, I don't want to come across as like dismissive of anything that has happened, but I'm taking everything that has happened so far this spring with a grain of salt. I'm not overly concerned at all with like production results to this point.
Yeah, and again, that is fair. I think it is something to keep an eye on. It's not something to start panicking or really drawing any really big conclusions from it, because like you said, there's so many different reasons for it. It's
Right.
just, in a guy that has had that microscope on him, it would, it would be nice if he had a stronger spring so far. Now, again, if he has a great last 3 weeks, nobody's going to remember necessarily. I mean,
Right.
everybody remembers the great 3 weeks he had 2 years ago that that really got him on the team, but he had slipped off by the end of that
Yep.
spring training. So when he starts getting some results on the field, then it won't really matter as how he started.
Right. And so the point I wanted to make real quick was that when you think about Jordan Walker, it's just a matter of him, feeling comfortable and feeling confident in himself, and really just believing in that change that he's made. So um allow the work to happen. And to the same effect, I know there's been some consternation about Nolan Gorman, and he was going through it too. And I
Mhm.
kind of made the point on Twitter that wouldn't you prefer these guys to be working through it and making the adjustments and getting more comfortable in their changes now rather than in June in the middle of the season whenever it's supposed to happen? Like if they're going to struggle, I want them to struggle right now while the microscope is on them, so that way while they have the technology and all of the extra set of eyes on them, that can be addressed as efficiently as possible. So that way, once the season does start, we can put all of the getting comfortable and all of that set aside, and it's just go time from March 27th on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and like I said, we'll see how the stretch run, if you will, of spring, looks for these guys, and hopefully they're hitting their stride as, opening day comes around. One of the things that I don't know that I look at it, but it's always kind of a bit interesting to me is to check out at bats because it kinda shows
Right.
who is getting the playing time. You don't expect necessarily the big names to be up here because, especially early spring, they're taking every day off or every other day or whatever the case may be. But it was just kind of interesting, Gorman, Wynn, and Arenado are the top 3 in at bats, and I think that all kind of makes some sense. 4th is Jose Fermin, which gives me the indication they're really looking at him as that backup utility guy, um, over maybe a Hellman or a Sajaci or something like that, that they really wanna see if he can handle that job, and so far, he's held his own.
Yeah, I think at this point, that 26th man on the roster, that's kind of a three-way competition right now between, like you had mentioned, Fermin. I think that Jose Barrero has
Mhm.
opened some eyes, the former top prospect in Cincinnati. And then also, like you had mentioned, Michael Hellman, the utility infielder, outfielder. He has the capability to play center field. He's a right-handed bat, so that offers some balance to a lot of left-handed bats on the team. And then he also has the ability to play a natural shortstop, which was, another key that they had talked about when acquiring him. That I think it gives Michael Hellman kind of the leg up on the other two because while Fermin does have the advanced batting eye, he doesn't really impact the baseball when he's at the major league level for whatever reason. And so right now at this point, I would, because the Cardinals have shown they've never put Fermin in center field, and so I think that kind of works as a step back for him. He's also not somebody they feel super confident with playing as a backup shortstop, and so I think that takes another step back for Fermin. However, he is the incumbent of that spot. And so, yes, I do think that it makes sense that they're giving him the most opportunity to show what he can do in this setting now. But if I had to guess, I would say that the most likely for that 26-man spot is Michael Hellman, followed by Jose Barrero, only because he's still an NRI. He's not on the 40-man. There's that extra step, and sometimes that does influence. But obviously, if he outplays the other two, then perhaps they just designate Fermin for assignment off the 40-man, and that clears that spot 1 for 1. But I kind of look at it as Fermin as like the underdog in this situation, where the other two kind of have skills that are more valuable to the Cardinals and the way that their roster is currently constructed.
It's possible. I agree the Cardinals have not been very open to letting Fermin play shortstop, even though the few times that I've seen him there, he's been passable for sure. And none of these guys are. If Mason Wynn goes down for 2, 3, 4 weeks, none of these guys are going to be the option, right? They'll
No,
find somebody to come up. That will be probably Sajaci or
right,
something of that nature. So it really doesn't matter too much if they can play shortstop on an extended period of time. But you're right, the Cardinals haven't done that. Again, don't we continue to say, and we'll say it forever, you don't look at the spring stats, but
right.
Hellman is 0 for 10 with 4 strikeouts and has not made necessarily the best impression, whereas Fermin is a known quantity, and that is something that the Cardinals like. I think Barrero, like you said, is an interesting possibility that adding to the 40 man is a step. It's not usually a terrible step. Somebody we'll see if there's a need for an injured, hopefully not a 60-day injured list situation, but if there was, that would do it. And there's always fringes at the end that they could
Right.
make that work. I just yeah, I don't know that they're ready to, they again, Cardinals have in the past been a team that likes to go the path of least resistance, and the least resistance would be
Right.
putting Fermin on there. That being,
Well,
also we don't know what the Cardinals are doing anymore because things are supposed to be changing.
again, for me or Hellman, because Hellman, when he was acquired, he was on the Twins 40 man, so he
Yeah,
automatically is on the Cardinals 40 man. So that would also offer the path of least resistance. And once again, because Hellman can play a capable center field and shortstop, that may give him a leg up on Fermin, even if he's not showing much offensively in camp. The idea is more about the flexibility that they would have for later in the game, perhaps, and maybe starting once a week, if that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be depend, of course, who else they want to take. If for some reason, I mean, if you're looking at center, if you've got Lars Newbar and you've got Mike Ciani, then you may not necessarily not necessarily need another, a potential center fielder. If they take Kaepernick, then they wouldn't necessarily need another outfielder. But having those abilities is a good thing. So you're right. I don't know. I'm very interested to see how this kind of plays out, and I think it's less about now and like you said, the next 3 weeks. If Hellman's getting a lot of every other day starts when Fermin isn't, then I think that's at least saying that they want to take a look at him, and that's not somebody they know as well as Fermin. So they've got to still get comfortable with that and see what that looks like. And I'll be interested to see if he plays a lot more, or if it's just a situation where they think maybe, he'll go to Memphis and, he'll be that option that in case they need him, he can come up.
Yeah, I think we'll see a healthy dose of Michael Hellman, Jose Barrero, and Jose Fermin as these last 3 weeks of spring training kind of come to, and I think that Ollie's going to make it has made it a true competition. Show us who wants that last spot on the bench and who can run with it and take it. So I think that's like one of those places where where there is real competition, not just kind of this, you know yeah, we're gonna let guys try to play their way onto the roster, but they already kind of have their minds made up, as opposed to this situation where I think there is legitimate competition for that last spot.
Something that is probably, when I did a roster construction, a little before spring training started, and I didn't have Luke and Baker on my list, for lots of reasons. Just didn't really know how he fit. I think that he's probably played himself into at least being a bench bat role, with this spring. Again, it's hard to know if he needs anything. He doesn't need anything else at Memphis, right? He's been there for like 3 or 4 seasons now. Um, it's about time to figure out if he can do anything in the major leagues. And this spring has shown that he's been pretty productive so far. So I think that I would expect that he has put himself on that roster.
Yeah, and he part of what Luke and Baker does also factors into that utility 26 man
Mhm.
player conversation, because if you're going to have essentially a positionless bat, first base, DH, whatever, they're very heavy in that situation. They're just looking to carry Luke and Baker's bat. Then you need somebody who can kind of balance what he doesn't do with some, even though Baker hits the crap out of the ball, he doesn't have much, defensive prowess, where the other
Mhm.
guys don't really hit that much, but they can be moved all over the board like a chess piece and, put wherever they need should they use Baker in that late game situation to take that at bat. And once again, referencing um, uh, winter warm up, Luke and Baker kind of talked about, his process and the way that he was thinking about things when he was going up to taking at bat. And you know, he's now more RBI driven than he is on power hitting. So that was an interesting kind of little tidbit that he had shared with us. And he said, I'm just going up to the plate every chance and just understanding the situation and trying to impact the game. Okay, what's the RBI in this spot and how do I achieve that? And so he's going up there just trying to think about how he's going to get whatever. So if it's a runner on second, okay, I need a base hit up the middle and that'll drive the run in. There's a runner on first and we're down by 2. Okay, I'm going to have to, swing a little harder and try to hit the ball into the gap to get that run home. So like he's coming up to the plate thinking about the situation and just kind of he described the way that whenever he first came up And we all saw this, and he kind of struggled because he said he was just so mentally unprepared for the moment and the situation, going into a big league game, and it was so fast. And now the second time that he came up this last season and down the stretch, and he was a little bit more productive, and he had some moments. He talked about how that change in mindset, and it really helped him unlock that next step for him at this level. So I kind of felt all along that he was going to be someone who wound up getting a bench spot. I mean, it's great to see what he's doing in spring, and putting kind of some of the power on display, and that only further helps, you know, um, solidify his spot on the bench. But I kind of had in my mind that they were going to want some of his right-handed balance because of all the left-handers. I mean, again, you talk about Gorman, Nootbaar, Donovan. You go down the list, Burleson. Like there's a healthy amount of left-handed presence on the team that some of the right-handedness can get a little bit overshadowed by that.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I did leave him off was the fact that how does this fit with if you need a backup shortstop, if you need this and that.
Right.
But it was also the fact that if he's going to be a bench bat, his strikeout numbers are not great, have not been great in the past, and that's a little bit concerning if it's the guy you're bringing in the seventh or whatever you'd like to make contact. That being said, he seems to have made an adjustment. I mean, one strikeout so far this spring. I think that, and I saw Ollie say something about trying to develop not only starters but also bench bats. He
Right.
needs them. So
Right.
I think that really kind of plays into what they're talking about.
Right. He talked about man, I'm just gonna keep using going back to this winter warm up well here, but all he talked about just kind of a lack of options late in games whenever they needed a big hit. So like while we do appreciate and enjoy what Michael Ciani is able to do, defensively from that aspect, we also know that his bat isn't quite to the same level as most of the other hitters. And so having that kind of that Luke and Baker presence to come off the bench late in a game to take that at bat for Michael Ciani and get that extra run home to win, that's the difference of maybe winning 2 or 3 extra games throughout the season. And so not having that option off the bench that has that impact really made Ollie feel like he was a little bit handcuffed with just the roster composition last season.
Yeah. All right, let's shift over to the other side then. Let's look at the pitching. And again, I mean, the biggest news pitching wise, I guess, from today at least, was the fact that they went ahead and demoted Tink Hence apparently to Springfield. There seems to be a little bit of question, but it sounds like Springfield. And Quinn Matthews has already been sent down. Cooper Jerpy's already been sent down. And I don't think anybody's terribly surprised at any of this. Nobody expected these guys to make the roster or anything. But it is interesting, right? Just in this idea of, the season is development and let's see what they have, all that. It's a little bit surprising that maybe they didn't try to find them a few more innings in spring to have an evaluation before they sent them out.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Katie Wu's piece that just came out today was talking about how it might be a competition between Andre Palante and Michael McGreevy for that spot. Whenever after this past season, we all kind of just assumed that Andre Palante had earned that spot in the rotation, and to some people's surprise that perhaps maybe Steven Matz's spot in the rotation because of his infrequency in which he's available may be something that they would cast aside a little bit for a separate opportunity. I was always under the impression that the Cardinals had their 5 starters coming into this season, between Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Andre Palante I had as a 3, and then Steven Matz and Miles Michael as 4 and 5 to round out the rotation. And to me, it's a little bit interesting that they would pit McGreevy versus Palante. Now, I do know that a couple of people have talked about how some of Palante's stuff is tracking a little bit down from where he was at the end of last season, and so could that perhaps be a factor in this situation? Maybe. But it's also, to the other extent, it's really nice to see Michael McGreevy continuing to build on top of what he had accomplished at the end of 2024.
Yeah, it is. I was never big on McGreevy. but he seems to have made some changes. And what we saw at the end of last season was enough to be intriguing, right? That if you
Right.
wanted to see if he could carry it over to this year, so far he has. Again, for as much as you give spring training credence, um, and yeah, I mean, I've always felt like you that was the 5-man rotation, and McGreevy probably is the 6th man out, which maybe maybe that's in Memphis, being a long starter for when Matz gets hurt, because I think we're pretty sure that that's going to happen.
They seem
Maybe
pretty
it's
bullish on it happening at some point. That was the excuse that Mo gave on why he didn't really look to move anyone out, is that he, traditionally guys don't go pole to pole, so like we need those reinforcements there. And so
mhm.
his interpretation was that somebody was likely to get hurt, and like, yes, the history suggests that somebody does get hurt in the rotation, but if you make it all the way through spring, then it makes that situation a lot more difficult to resolve. But again, they talked about, like, obviously everyone asked the hypothetical, what if you get to the end of spring and everybody's healthy? Then they say, oh well, that's a good problem to have. And it's like, well, you know is that really necessarily achieving both things that you're talking about with trying to compete and clearing runway? Because what is it exactly that Michael McGreevy does that, or what, I guess I should say, what does like Steven Matz accomplish that Michael McGreevy couldn't? Right. So from that aspect, I'm not talking about Miles Michaelis, because Miles
Up
Michaelis does
up his trade value. That's what
it,
he what he can do.
for sure. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's the
I mean,
idea.
that is the only thing.
That's the idea behind why they've stuck with Mats
Right.
in my mind. And I had been a proponent for, looking at trying to move him this offseason, because, that's a whole separate conversation.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
for me, I feel like that's the most, easily transferable spot is Steven Matz's. But again, Steven Matz does have a track record that if he's healthy and in pitching as a healthy pitcher, that he is a more than capable, mid rotation starter for a team. And so they're going to start with that, but there's no way in knowing where it's going to end up leading, as the season goes along.
Well, and that's true, and the thing is, it's also possible, I mean, that Matz isn't the one that gets hurt, right? I mean, anybody else could get hurt in that rotation. We don't want anybody to get hurt in that rotation, but, you know, we saw that last year, right? We spent a whole lot of time in the winter talking about, okay, they got their 3 pitchers, but they should have gotten more, and who knows what happened, and then, Sonny Gray had what was it, a groin or a hamstring or something of that nature in spring. Took him, he only missed like 1 start in the regular season, but for a while there, it looked a little bit scary, right? You can't guarantee. Matz is more likely to be the one that gets hurt, but it could be somebody else. And so, you know, it's not as easy as just swapping Matz and McGreevy, unfortunately, because that would improve the team in theory. Although, like you said, Matz has pitched very well. And I think we're all going to feel like that. The anchor is going to be Miles Michaelis, right? I mean, I haven't seen anything this spring. And again, he's a veteran. He's a very, he's been around, whatever. But I haven't seen anything that necessarily indicates that we're going to get some sort of, last resurgence of Miles Michaelis. So it feels like it's going to be kind of still. I don't know that he's going to be the pitcher that had like the next to last ERA in the league like he was last year, but it still feels like he's going to be a, replacement level at best type of starter.
Yeah, for Miles Michaelis is a little bit different. So like I know that everyone's favorite, he's everyone's favorite player to dunk on, and I understand why. Like the ERA is ugly, and the performance, the pitching specs aren't all that particularly interesting. But when you consider Miles Michaelis last season led the team in quality starts, he had 16. That's more than Sonny Gray, more than Kyle Gibson, and we consider those two to be considerable rocks. The unfortunate thing is the other 14 starts Miles Michaelis absolutely got rocked in. And so he's really just, Miles Michaelis is a box of chocolates. You just never know what you're going to get. And so from that angle, like I kind of have developed this new theory about him that I'm going to like look at him the same way that I looked at Kyle Gibson a year ago. And everyone was kind of hemming and hawing and thinking about, oh, Kyle Gibson, blah, vanilla, not exciting at all. And from my point of view, I saw, a level of stability, at least in Kyle Gibson, where I knew I knew what I was getting. I knew I was going to get 10 good starts. I knew I was going to get 10 bad starts. I didn't know what that 10 in the middle was going to be. And so I look at Miles Michaelis, and obviously he has the track record, and we know that if his stuff is playing in the zone and he's able to miss bats at least enough to where it's not getting hammered, that he's a capable starter in the major leagues. And so from that aspect, I 10 good starts, 10 bad starts. It's the 10 starts in the middle that you don't really know what you're going to get out of him that's going to define who Miles Michaelis is in 2025. And that's kind of the way that I continue to look at him as he continues to pitch. And if he winds up having all 10 of those bad starts to begin the season, I don't think we'll see the 10 good starts or the 10 in between starts. I think that's about going to be the end of the line for him because it is his final season under contract. And what use is it if you're just, like you said, continuing to throw an anchor out there every day if he's not performing to a level when easily you could have Michael McGreevy or even, let's talk about Matthew Liberatore. He's been super impressive so far in spring, getting out 21 of 22 batters faced this year. Apparently the Cardinals still haven't quite given up hope that he becomes a potential starter down the road as well. And if he's able to take what he learned in the bullpen last year and apply a reliever's mentality to a starter's workload, like and I'm not saying he's Garrett Crochet or Reynaldo Lopez, I'm not saying he's that level, but those guys went to the bullpen with good stuff and kind of took that mentality and said, I'm just going to give my best stuff for as long as possible throughout the season. And it wound up paying dividends for them. We're going to see Clay Holmes and New York try to do that same thing that those guys did last year. And, down the road after midseason, if all of these veterans kind of move on, if the season doesn't go well, I think that Matthew Liberatore might get another run in the rotation.
Yeah, he might. And I mean, it wouldn't be the worst thing at all. It is going to be very interesting because he has had so many struggles in the rotation, and then when he's gone to the bullpen, he has been effective. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, maybe it is a mindset thing, or maybe it's just better for him to be able to pitch 2
Well,
or 3 innings mid game versus trying to think that he's going to have to go 5 at least.
not only that, but he was very splitty before he moved to the bullpen, right? He excelled against left-handed hitting, but he could not get righties out. And since moving to the bullpen, I know this spring especially, he's been working on a cutter, which is going to be his primary weapon against right-handed batters. And so far, it's showing that it's having great success. And I know that there are specs on that pitch that are grading out very well in terms of its effectiveness too. So could it be once again that change in his arsenal that allows him to kind of unlock that next level for him that he didn't have whatever 2 years ago whenever he was getting that initial opportunity to start. So it's just it continues to evolve, and once again, development isn't always a linear process. You take steps forward and back, but hopefully at the end of the day you end up somewhere where you meet your ceiling at some point.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see if if they need a spot starter, that's one thing. He'll probably get it if he's in the bullpen. But if they need to, somebody's gonna miss 2 or 3 times around the rotation, do they go to him? Do they go to McGreevy, assuming he's the guy in
Right.
Memphis? I think that will be interesting because it's not the easiest thing to shift from
No,
a bullpen spot, especially when in the season you're probably, at best throwing 2 innings, maybe 3 at here and there, to then, getting some length and trying to go 4 or 5 as a starter.
No, and he has some experience in that, but again,
Mhm.
like, a starter's mentality and workload is different from a reliever's in the preparation and, the way that he gets ready for games and all of that nature, it changes. And I think that's something that kind of goes, unsaid sometimes about guys who get flip-flop between starter and reliever and up and down. And it changes the way that they're able to prepare. And we know that baseball players are tremendous creatures of habit. And so some guys just don't give an F and they'll go out and do whatever they want. But some guys, have to have that routine and that proper preparation to be the best version of themselves going out there. And it just kind of depends on what opportunity presents itself. Now, speaking of Matthew Liberatore, if he winds up back in the bullpen, great. Like, he's a weapon out there and he's shown that he's capable of doing that. But I'm not saying this from, a sunken cost fallacy where I'm like, he's got to be something because we gave up Randy Arozarena. I'm not coming from that perspective. I don't. That's over with. That's in the past. We've moved on from that. At this point, it's what's best for Matthew Liberatore and what will help him achieve that you know that ceiling that he could have been or could become at his max um, development. And so from that perspective, if it's as a starter, great. If he's, a reliever and he kind of becomes Andrew Miller, great. Like, whatever it winds up being, he's a major league pitcher, and that's a success.
Yeah, yeah, and I will be. I mean, again, just interesting to see. We know what was it 2 years ago they sent Zach Thompson down after being a fairly successful. Had shifted to their bullpen and been fairly successful, sending to Memphis to become a starter. Would they do that with Liberatore? Would they, try to let him figure it out on the major league, especially with a less pressure environment this year? I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting to see. And then, we're talking like, these are the two that are the front runners right now. But, if Quinn Matthews has a strong start at Memphis, there's going to be a lot of clamoring for him to be a guy that comes in if Steven Matz gets hurt or something like that. And I think in the past, the Cardinals wouldn't have been able to resist it. I'm wondering if this year they might be able to, and to give, either Liberatore or McGreevy that shot versus, the shot in the arm that might be a Quinn Matthews.
Yeah, and do you care if I pass along some news that just came across my phone? It's not entirely surprising, but interesting nonetheless. It kind of falls into the topic of what we're talking about. The Cardinals have announced that Matt Swanson and Sim Robersa have been optioned to Memphis, so now their camp stands at 54 players. So that is the latest on where the
Yeah.
Cardinals' cuts are. And after hearing about Tink Hence earlier today, like you had mentioned,
Mhm.
so just kind of continuing to pare down the roster, and guys that we kind of really didn't think were going to make the opening day roster are starting to fall off, and those more meaningful innings are going to the guys that are really more in the truer competition to get those roster spots.
Yeah. That being said, Swanson stuck around longer than I expected. He only did throw 3 innings, and there wasn't necessarily um, anything that stood out. But yeah, I kind of, it's kind of interesting to see when people get sent down versus when they don't. Roberta never really recovered from that first, outing, which was just
No.
terrible. But Swanson had, I think he's going to be an interesting guy to track. Because when he came over, it was kind of that throw in. Let's see, was he the DeYoung one? I think he
Yeah,
came over
he
with DeYoung
he for
trade.
DeYoung 1-for-1.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of this, this lottery ticket. But so far, he had a great year in Springfield, and it's a good chance he'll be in Memphis. And if you're, in Memphis, you've got to, all you're one step away from making a debut. And I don't think anybody would have expected that when he came over.
Yeah, Kareem Hawk, who does a great job on Twitter and on Birds on the Farm, that and talking about Swanson's one of the guys that he talks about, and he talked about how he was kind of like a failed starter, and the Cardinals put him in the bullpen, and he's found another gear since being moved to the bullpen, and so he might be somebody you might see in St. Louis at some point this season as part of that Memphis shuttle. So uh, I think his stuff showed well enough. I don't think that there's probably any more to be gleaned from what he might do in game during spring. So it just makes the most sense for him to kind of go down and get into that routine with the minor league guys in minor league camp and be ready to ramp it up for Memphis.
3 innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs. That was Matt Swanson. That was also Ryan Helsley so far. So, I mean, if you want to compare yourself to somebody, if you're a reliever, you're like, hey, I'm doing just as good as Helsley, so
I
I should be
wouldn't,
fine.
but that's one direction you could go.
Oh, me. I think the bullpen is going to be interesting. They're relying a lot on players that had good years last year, which is always a little bit dangerous with relievers. But I'm gonna be interested to see what new faces and how much rotation, do they do on these guys? How much are we gonna see the up and downs? I know it's limited to some degree, but are we gonna see a Bailey Horn who did not have a good spring and got sent down very, very early? Is that a guy that we will see, or is that a guy that's gonna just kind of pass off into nothingness? Are we going to see are we going to see one of these young guys like a Derby maybe make their debut out of the bullpen? And then we have to have the discussion about whether they'll ever be a starter or what. I don't know. I'm still
Which
don't know that. Hmm?
will cause our good friend Kyle Reese to have an absolute like conniption fit if Cooper Jerpy ends up in the bullpen and that's all he ever becomes. It'll be Ryan Helsley 2.0 all over again for him.
Well, yeah, but Kyle's going to have a meltdown about something no matter. So,
Shout out to Kyle Reese, great guy, love him.
yeah, yeah. Kyle's probably not listening this far. He probably gave up by now.
Yeah, probably.
But um, yeah, I think that's going to be, and then there's guys like the reliables, the John Kings, the Chris Roycrofts, the guys that aren't going to be fun or fancy, but I think those are the kind of guys that really help help get it from a middling rotation last year to that back into the bullpen of what was last year, Kittredge and Romero and Helsley, which might swap out Kittredge for Ryan Fernandez right now.
Yep.
But I think that when those middle relief guys that are not necessarily all that exciting, but can be pretty interesting at times.
Yeah, so like the way I'm kind of looking at it, so yeah, like you said, Ryan Helsley at the back end, and then you have Fernandez and Romero, who's probably going to get those primarily high leverage opportunities or late in games, seventh, eighth inning as the bridge guys, and then Liberatore and King probably factor in there in the middle innings and probably some high leverage situations as well, and then another guy that the Cardinals players talked about whenever we were at winter warmup. Hey, there's your throwback to winter warmup again. Riley O'Brien was a name mentioned specifically by several guys, and they just, the only thing that really stuck out to me was Ryan Helsley just goes, that dude's nasty. And so that kind of makes you perk your ears up whenever, a guy of that ilk says, man, that dude is disgusting. And so I think assuming health, and that's always been a big if with Riley O'Brien, if he stays healthy and he's able to put it all together at the major league level, that dude is going to be a weapon. And so he's someone else that factors into that. And then you kind of had talked about Chris Roycroft, and I think Gordon Graceffo also might factor into the long relief Memphis shuttle kind of role. I think Kyle Leahy is somebody that's going to factor into that as well. He was somebody who impressed me last season. I thought he pitched some tough innings for the Cardinals at certain points throughout the season, and he impressed me. I thought he had good stuff. I thought that he handled the moment really well. So he's someone I'm going to be watching keenly throughout the season. And then Rodri Munoz, who they claimed off waivers, kind of in that failed starter mold, but the dude throws absolute gas. And if they can develop a quality secondary with him, that could be a weapon out of the bullpen as well. So there are definitely some options. And then you mentioned Bailey Horn was another one. Another tall lefty, as if the Cardinals don't have enough left-handers already ready to go, but has a big breaking ball. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Liberatore, like great value Matthew Liberatore, where it's like the fastball, it's not all that impressive, but the curveball is really cool. And what kind of can become of him. They're very similar, akin to each other in that respect, but I think that Liberatore is, a couple steps ahead of where Bailey Horn is. And so for me, it's going to be a lot of pieces moving in and out in that road. And they're going to have, those awesome miles on their car driving back and forth from Memphis to St. Louis, or flying out and getting those points on wherever they're going and the team is. But it's going to be a healthy rotation of pitchers going through that bullpen at certain points throughout the season, no doubt.
We've talked a lot about guys that have been sitting down already, but there are two guys still in camp that are a little interesting in that young gun type of way. Gordon Graceffo, who was a guy that I think most of us kind of thought would have a chance at a bullpen role maybe this year, especially after the little bit that he got last year. So I'm not as surprised that he's still sticking around. But Takeo Roby is still in camp. And I don't know that means much of anything. He'll probably be sitting down like tomorrow or something. Now that, by the time you listen to this podcast, he's probably already been sent down.
Speak it
But
and it becomes truth.
yeah. But I think it's very interesting to me that they've not only, they've used him quite a bit. They've used him in bullpen roles, and with his health, you wonder if they're thinking about, at least easing him into things. Another guy that probably needs to be a starter. He always has been a starter, and but has seemed to show a little bit in the bullpen this spring that makes you wonder what the front office is thinking with him.
Yeah, and look, I mean, obviously TK Roby has always had good stuff, right? Like that's always been his calling card. Like the stuff impresses whenever you see it. And so when you think about it, yes, it's interesting that he's still there, but to the same extent, they really haven't gotten to see him very much over the last 2
Mhm.
years that he's been in the system. And so you look at this as an early opportunity to kind of see what you have. And now that he's also on the 40 man, um, you're kind of just taking stock and seeing, and the big league staff is kind of seeing it with their own eyes. I still think that the organization long term views him as a starter, and so I have every expectation. Now, obviously, he can play his way into the Memphis rotation, and that may be where he is end up ticketed for. But I do think that long term he winds up remaining as a starter. Now, if health creeps its way into that situation, every pitcher gets hurt. It happens, and it sucks. But that's the reality of being a pitcher, especially in this day and age. Now with Cardinals, or with Tekoa Roby specifically, I still think that there's too much ceiling in his profile for them not to continue to run him out as a starter in the minor leagues rather than kind of explore what that might look like as a reliever yet. I'm waiting for that starter um, profile to kind of fail in essence a little bit before I'm ready to explore what that looks like as a reliever, because that obviously then takes his value down a notch. And again,
Mhm.
if you're assessing this like a business, you're looking at it from the perspective that you want to continue to grow your guys in the most valuable roles possible. And if that's Tekoa Roby as a starter, then you're going to continue down that path while you still have the flexibility and the time to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the case. Like I said, I think there would have been some years where a strong showing like this would have gotten him maybe a jump into the bullpen, but, we continue to talk about how this is not a normal this is not those kind of years.
Right.
We're seeing that kind of transition, and I think you're right. I think that there's enough there that the Cardinals are, again, hopefully not really seduced by what he has done right now and want to see him, starting at Memphis or whatever the case may be. Now, there may be a lot of different arms. That's kind of one of the things that with Tink Hence maybe going to Springfield, there seem to be a lot of arms may possibly ticketed for Memphis, and it could be a very interesting year to watch those games. But I think that's probably most likely where it is. It's just kind of interesting that he's still here, just a couple weeks before the season starts.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and obviously it is still noteworthy that he's still here for sure. And like, not that I think JJ Weatherholt is going to make the opening day
Mhm,
roster or
mhm.
anything like that, but the fact that he's still, in big league camp and still getting big, reps, starting opportunities on, is noteworthy to me, and it is something to watch and monitor to be interesting in. And I'm very curious to see what his placement is going to be once he is optioned out or sent out, and kind of what they have him pegged for, whether they send him to high A and play in Peoria, or if they are aggressive and send him straight to Springfield and kind of give him that taste of Texas League ball. Um, Being such an advanced hitter and advanced player with such polish in his profile, I'm really interested and intrigued to watch, because if he's sent to Double A right away and he looks like he can handle himself now, obviously again, spring training stats don't matter, but the way that he's displaying his ability to kind of handle himself and put up big league at bats and major league spring training camp, it's noteworthy and it's interesting to watch. And it certainly could portend to him getting a little bit more of an aggressive assignment right out the gate, which might then get him to St. Louis a little bit sooner than perhaps expected. Now, I'm not sure that it's going to be this season in 2025, but I think when you talk about JJ Weatherholt specifically, I know we were talking about the pitchers, but a little bit off on a tangent here. But could he make his name and his mark on the Cardinals starting in early 2026? I think that could be something that could be genuinely on the table for the Cardinals.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't there is a tendency to want to rush these guys up, and we want like but sometimes they need to fail a little bit in the minor leagues too. And I think that's Weatherholt's a guy that's probably is. You said maybe beginning of next year is a possibility. I think that's probably the earliest that you would want to see it. But I mean, you just never know, I guess. So, Jake, it's been fun. Is there anything before we wrap it up that we didn't touch on that you'd like to, or something you'd
Yeah.
like to talk about?
So this week I have an article coming out. So talking about moving from Rambling Redbirds to Viva El Birdos, I also get the opportunity to write for them. So this week I took a look at, and my the title of my article this week is going to be called Red Light, Green Light. It's very fun, and it's all about the Cardinals' inability to prevent stolen bases, and how that kind of led to where they are. They last season the Cardinals ranked 29th out of 30th in terms of stolen bases allowed per game, and the only team that was worse at that was the Pittsburgh Pirates. Um, I looked at how the Cardinals could go about addressing that problem going forward, and I looked at the catching tandem specifically in all off season, or I should say late in the off season, and we found out about Ivan Herrera going to Driveline and boosting his throwing, his arm strength. What I found was interesting was that even though Ivan Herrera and Pedro Pajes had roughly the same metrics in terms of like runners thrown out and of that nature, caught stealing. Pedro Pajes actually had his arm strength is about 5 miles an hour stronger than Ivan Herrera's, and I had no idea that the disparity was so significant in that uh, he rated out his arm strength was stronger than Wilson Contreras, and we know how strong Wilson Contreras is supposedly supposed to have. And so the fact that Pedro Pajes's arm was almost 2 miles an hour stronger than Wilson Contreras's, that made me wonder, why is it then that somebody whose arm is significantly weaker than his wound up they each had about the roughly the same amount of stolen base percentage, caught stealing guys. So I looked at the starting pitchers, right? And apparently on Baseball Savant, there is something called pitcher running game. And of 497 qualified pitchers in 2024, the Cardinals had two pitchers in the bottom 11 of all of baseball at net bases prevented, which is just a fancy way of saying of their ability to either hold runners on or have them thrown out whenever they're pitching, right? Can you, so in we referenced Nate and Ben early on in the show. Let's play a little game real quick. Can you name the two starters? I know you love trivia so much. Can you name the two starters that ranked in the bottom 11 in terms of net bases prevented for the Cardinals?
I mean, we don't play games on this show. We save that for. Let's see. I would guess Miles Michaelis, just because that's what you always guess. And if we're gonna go for a trick, let's say Sonny Gray.
So you were 1 for 2. Sonny Gray was credited with a -9, and he was 9th worst in all of baseball. The 11th worst in all of baseball was Andre Palante, and he was a -8. For reference, Corbin Burns is the worst in baseball at a -21. But I also speculated that when you generate as much swing and miss and soft contact as he does in his profile, it really doesn't matter that much that he's allowing so many guys to take bases. But going down the list, John King was a -5, Lance Lynn was a -4, Andrew Kittredge was a -2, and there are so many guys that struggled so significantly at either effectively holding runners on or being quick enough to the plate that it would give the Cardinals catchers an opportunity to even throw runners out. And I think that if that is made an emphasis, going into the season this year, that hopefully the Cardinals will be better at that, and that will help in their run prevention, thus leading to more potential wins. So that's just not giving away everything in the story, but that's a good chunk of it. So something to look forward to on Tuesday whenever that article is published.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, I think that's the running game is going to be a huge thing. I mean, we've talked about it since Yachty left, and the changes that baseball has made, it's become difficult anyway. So it will be an interesting thing to see how that adjusts this year. So
I know it's not popular to say positive things about Miles Michaelis, but between Miles Michaelis and Kyle Gibson, they were actually two of the highest rated Cardinals at +5 in terms of preventing extra bases taken.
Usually they just gave them up to start with. So.
Well, could be, but
Oh me. All right. Well, it's been great talking with Jake this week. Next week, Dane Perry is going to join us from CBS Sports and his Birdie Works Substack. So we look forward to that. But until then, again, remember we got a couple more segments on the other end of this, so stick around. But until next week, for Jake, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Suter from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's a winner. That's a winner. A World Series winner for the Cardinals.
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and today I'm taking a look back at how the Cardinals integrated their spring training accommodations. In 1961, 14 years after Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier, racial segregation still loomed over Major League Baseball spring training camps, including St. Petersburg, Florida, where the St. Louis Cardinals prepared for the season. While white ballplayers rented properties for their families or stayed at the Vinoy Park Hotel, the team's official spring training hotel, black players, including Bill White, Curt Flood, and Bob Gibson, were barred from staying there. Instead, they were sent across town to a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Williams. For Bill White, who had joined the Cardinals in 1959, this was a frustrating but familiar reality. St. Louis already had a reputation as an unwelcome city for black ball players, and its spring training accommodations only reinforced that. In 1961, White decided he'd had enough. The breaking point came in March when the St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce planned a salute to baseball breakfast. The invitation list included only white players. White, Flood, and Gibson? Not on the list. In an interview with the Associated Press, White didn't just question the breakfast snub. He called out the entire system, asking, "When will we be made to feel like humans?" They invited all but the colored players. Even the kids who have never come to bat once in the major leagues received invitations. That is, if they were white. His comments ignited a firestorm. The Chamber of Commerce claimed it was all a misunderstanding, and the Cardinals' PR team insisted the list was only based on hotel proximity, not race. Newspapers across the country framed the controversy as a simple miscommunication. White found a surprising ally in Al Fleischman, a public relations consultant for Anheuser-Busch, the brewery that owned the St. Louis Cardinals. Instead of telling White to keep quiet, he encouraged him to keep speaking up. Meanwhile, Dr. Ralph Wimbish, president of the local NAACP chapter, announced that he would no longer assist teams in finding separate housing for black players. In response, the Cardinals asked the Vinoy Park Hotel to change its policy, but the hotel refused. So instead, a local businessman stepped in, purchasing the Skyline and Outrigger motels where all players, black and white, could stay together. In a show of solidarity, Stan Musial and Ken Boyer moved out of their beachfront properties to stay at the hotel alongside their teammates. The result transformed the Cardinal spring training experience. Quote, "The Cardinal Motel became a tourist attraction," Bob Gibson later wrote. "People would drive by to see black and white families swimming together or holding one of our famous team barbecues." For White, one letter of support stood out above all others. Quote, "Dear Bill, I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate everything you've done for black baseball players. Keep up the fight." The letter was signed, Jackie Robinson. So that's the story of how the Cardinals integrated their spring training accommodations in St. Petersburg, Florida. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, and go Cards.
Swing and it's get up, baby, get up, get up, get up. Home run. He's done it again.
All right, it's a voice you haven't heard in a while, but we've been missing Coach Alan Medlock, and so we're glad to get him in here to talk about the Tulsa Hale team. And we were supposed to do this last week, but one half of this show is incompetent, and the other half is Alan. So, Alan, how are things, and how are things going? I guess on the baseball front.
Well, the results haven't been where we've wanted them to be, but expectations were low. We're really young. Right now, we're starting three sophomores and a freshman. Tomorrow, I haven't gone public to the guys yet, but I will be starting 3 sophomores and 2 freshmen. And they're just getting used to high school baseball. So we lost a tough one on Saturday against a rival, and then a district team that was in the state tournament last year beat us on Monday. We were rained out yesterday, and we turned around and play tomorrow, and it looks like the weather's going to hold out, and we could be okay. We've pitched extremely well, better than any start that we've ever had on the bump. Limited to we've walked 7 guys in 2 games, which in high school that's great. We walked 3 in our first 7 innings, and it was a sophomore starter in that one, and then we had a sophomore starter against Coweta, who's really good. He struck out 4 over 4.5 innings and only walked 1 guy. We just wanted to save his pitch count after that, but he may be special. We're really excited about it. He's our number 1 catcher, and he turns around and he'll be one of our top 2 on the bump. So we feel pretty good about where we are with that. I've said this forever to anybody that listens. This will be my best team, but it'll probably be my best team in April and May, and in March will be a little bit rough just because we're still getting used to the high school game. But we like where we're at. We've had really, really good practices the past week, and the rain allowed us to come in and maybe change some things that we're going to do offensively to put the ball in play a little bit more, and I think that's going to be extremely advantageous to us.
So I know last year you started out with 3 goals, I think, if I remember right.
Yes.
Are you keeping the same? I know you didn't hit them all last year. Are you keeping the same 3 this year, or is the youth of your team going to make you modify a little bit?
Yeah, we've lowered some expectations this year. We did it more on a just different basis of how we're going to approach some things. How we just want to get better defensively. We want to get better pitching, and we feel like we've already done that in the off season. Our bats are behind, but that's kind of expected that just because we haven't been able to hit and stay in any rhythm just due to the weather. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep our head above water. We have some tournaments that we're trying to steal some wins at there. We feel like we have a good chance tomorrow. We want to win double-digit games. That hasn't been done in a while. We want to finish 6th or 7th in our district, which puts us in a regional that's very that's close and familiar to us because you cross bracket. And we think we know who it's going to be on the other side before it's all said and done. And then we want to win that regional game that I haven't been able to in 3 years. You know, we feel like if we can do that this year, then next year we can be pretty dang dangerous. But yeah, our goals are similar, but a little bit modified just due to our youth. I'll tell you this: we were expecting a much larger setback than we have now. We've had freshmen that have shown up on campus and a sophomore move-in that has shown up on campus that has changed the way that we're going to look at the season.
It's always good to get those that talent that you didn't necessarily expect was coming, isn't it?
Well, the funny thing about it is, I still teach the newcomer class, which is new to the country, and they don't speak English. And I have 3 kids out of there that have really come on board, and this is the first time this has ever happened for me, to where these kids will come in and play. And I mean, 2 of them are going to be substantial. The other one, we have had a move in from out of state, and he's played baseball his whole life, and he's a guy that we've given the center field job to, and we're going to let him run with it. And it's been a huge benefit for us.
Yeah. Have you seen? And I mean, it's always hard to tell, but I know, especially in high school football, there's tons of write-ups and predictions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm assuming that there's at least some of that in baseball. Have you seen, especially over the last 2 or 3 years since you took over, a difference in how, like maybe the press looks at y'all going into the season?
Yeah. Without a doubt. Here's a good example of kind of how some of those things, one of one of the benefits of where things are going with us now is you can really tell that where you thought you were going to take a step back talent wise, what we have really seen is the fact that the culture has withstood some bumps and bruises, and that the kids still want to be a part of it. And what our long term goal is still in the works, and probably stronger now than ever, because you have some of these young guys coming on board. That being said, the press and some of the early prognostications have shown that, like, we have been voted out of the basement the last 2 years in our district, where last year we fully believed that we were I want to say the worst team in the district, but our district's so good that you just want to keep your head above water. And it has shown. And this year we were voted, the 7th out of 8 place team, which is great for TPS. And we feel like that we can go and scare somebody. And you get past this gauntlet of playing the 3 best teams, who we feel the 3 best teams are in our district. We're going to scare some people in the second half of the season. And people have taken notice. We have such a young battery that we think that that's going to garner some attention as well.
Yeah, it sounds almost like you need a little Bugs Bunny there, let him pitch and catch at the same time.
Oh man, well, and I will say something else too. We had a kid that we thought we were going to lose for the year because he blew out his elbow. He came back so fast from surgery that he got full clearance yesterday. And he was the guy that we thought was going to be the number 1 on the mound. He won't pitch much for us for the first half of the season, but he can catch. And that changes everything. If you have 2 really good catchers, and we have a good shortstop and a good center fielder, and if anybody that's listened to your and I show, I build everything from up the middle, and we're in a really good spot. And the guys work their tail off to get better. There's a lot of enthusiasm right now. I didn't anticipate to feel this way at the end of last year, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. There's been a lot of teaching baseball. It has been great so far.
Well, good. And I assume that, and that all comes from, I'm assuming, some strong off-season work as well.
Sure. Yeah, we had a great summer. That's another thing. You start if your expectation is that you're just going to roll with us through the summer ball and everything like that, then they just buy into it. And we played some pickup fall games. You have 10, 11, 12 guys there for those. I'm proud to say what we've put in place has kind of started to grow. You've seen some of the seedlings really start to come from the ground, and that's such a good feeling.
Yeah. We look forward to following it throughout the year and seeing how they're doing. I know in weeks to come you'll have players of the week for us. I don't imagine you do now if you've only had a couple of games.
Sure, I have a kid in mind, but let's wait on that, just because we haven't hit well enough to give anybody any accolades. I'll just say that our center fielder, who's 14 years old, is highly impressive.
Well, good. Okay, that's
and he'll get some more pub as we move along.
I'm sure he will. So, it's good to have you back here, at least for a brief segment. I look forward to doing this throughout until you're back full time in the saddle come at the end of May, beginning of June. Anything else that you want to hit on before we leave?
No, I think we're good. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the kids, and I hope you guys enjoy listening about it. Although it could be 5-6+ hours away from you, but I appreciate you guys' help on the fundraisers and stuff like that, and it means a lot to us.
All right, well, we'll do it again next week. So thanks.
They just won't go away.